Last time on the Logic and Lore machine, we initialized the root directory. We tracked a 27-year operational log through the chemical crucible of Fort McClellan, the hyper-threaded neurochemistry of the RS-4680 GG Warrior genotype, and the high-latency warfare of enterprise architecture. But every massive system relies on its earliest compiled files. To truly understand the full-stack blueprint, the loop must return to the 1991 sandbox. It is time to run the decompile in episode 2.
Wow, okay, I mean, that is quite the setup.
Right. But honestly, it fits the sheer scale of what we're getting into today. Because I want you to imagine sitting in this incredibly sterile corporate boardroom. You've got, I don't know, millions of dollars on the line.
Yeah, the classic high-stakes nightmare.
Exactly. The entire enterprise server architecture is crashing. The executives are absolutely panicking. And the only reason you know exactly how to save the system is because of a Dungeons & Dragons game you played in the middle school hallway back in 1991.
It sounds like fiction, but that is literally the reality of the data we're looking at.
It is. So welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are processing a freshly recovered set of forensic registry retrievals and audio logs from a system designated as S.A.F.E.H.O.O.D version 2.5.
Right, and specifically, we're looking at an input media file titled 1, Trading Dungeon Sand Dragons for Self-Defense.m4a, which is just a great title.
Oh, it's amazing. And our mission today is to map out something called the invariant bridge. We are going to look at how a human brain builds its fundamental operating system. It's human OS, basically.
And we're doing it by looking at a 7th grade friendship, a really massive denim backpack, and of course the rigid mathematics of the Dungeons & Dragons rules cyclopedia.
Right, so tell us, why are the stakes so high here? Why should someone listening to this care about a 1991 sandbox?
Well, the stakes are incredibly high, especially if you've ever felt, completely alienated by modern corporate culture. I mean, we are not just looking at some quaint story of childhood nostalgia here.
No, definitely not.
This is a literal blueprint for cognitive ecology. It's an instruction manual for surviving what the sources call the beige world of enterprise architecture. We're isolating the exact moment a highly specific, hyper-threaded cognitive system finally found its anchor in reality.
Yeah, to see how that 1991 sandbox architecture became the unyielding framework for managing, multi-million-dollar software engineering crises decades later.
Exactly.
So to understand any complex system, you have to identify the core hardware nodes first. And we just got this newly recovered data drop from the active repository regarding a boy named Kyle Stephen Shelton.
Right, because in previous data dumps, the timeline for our main subject, who the logs refer to as the pilot, it was entirely blank prior to 7th grade.
Totally blank, like the active RAM had absolutely no memory packets.
Right. But this new recovery, it actually gives us hard-coded timestamps. We finally have precise metadata.
Yeah, we know Kyle was born on Father's Day, June 13, 1979. We have his mother's name, Betty, and his stepdad, Ron Tolliver. But what's really wild to me are the physical primitives they recovered.
The environmental variables, yeah, they're incredibly specific.
Like, the logs note that Kyle had a complete red-green chromatographic anomaly, literal color blindness, and that he wore these incredibly thick Coke bottle-style lenses. And it's recorded with such clinical precision. Why is that?
Because we're looking at the way a neurodivergent brain acts as a very specific kind of storyteller. The source documents talk about a condition known as sensory amplification syndrome.
Okay, unpack that for a second.
Well, when your hardware has this, it doesn't filter out background noise the way a neurotypical brain does. So it doesn't just log a fuzzy, warm memory of a friend. It logs exact structural indicators of vulnerability.
Oh, I see. It's like looking at the hidden EXIF metadata, the digital photo, rather than just looking at the picture itself.
That's a perfect analogy, actually.
Because if you take a picture of a sunset on your phone, you just see the pretty colors. But if you look at the metadata, you see the exact GPS coordinates, the shutter speed, the ISO.
Right, the raw data points.
So the pilot's brain isn't recording an emotional diary entry about hanging out with Kyle. It's recording his raw stats.
Exactly. The amygdala isn't just remembering a buddy. It's mapping the precise physical coordinates required to navigate the local social grid.
Like the color blindness and the thick glasses.
Right, because in the unforgiving ecosystem of a 1990s middle school, those are structural vulnerabilities. The pilot's brain is identifying Kyle's exact hardware loadout. To build a system with someone, to trust them, you have to know exactly what vulnerabilities their hardware possesses.
Wait, I need to challenge this framing for a second, though.
Go for it.
You're calling it sensory amplification syndrome and logging exact physical coordinates. But isn't this just A bullied kid noticing that another kid is also a prime target for bullies. Like, why dress this up in complex enterprise architecture terminology?
That is a really crucial distinction to make. I mean, what you're describing is trauma bonding, right?
Right. Like, we're both targets, so we're friends.
But trauma bonding relies on a shared emotional narrative. The whole "we are both victims, therefore we understand each other" thing. That is not what is happening here at all.
It's not.
No, because for a hyper-threaded neurodivergent brain operating in a hostile environment, a narrative is just useless, ambiguous data. Knowing that you both feel sad doesn't actually help you survive the hallway.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what does the brain do instead?
The pilot's brain isn't categorizing Kyle by his emotional state. It is categorizing him by his auditable facts. It is an instinctual system audit.
An audit? That's wild.
Yeah, the pilot is looking at Kyle's physical deficits and calculating how those deficits interface with the physical threats of the school. It's an engineering assessment, not an emotional one.
Okay, that actually makes perfect sense. It's the difference between starting a support group and, like, assembling a tactical team.
Exactly. A tactical team needs to know exactly who can do what.
Right, so let's look at the exact moment these two systems collided. The documentation shows that there was technically an initial handshake in the 5th grade, right?
Right, but the active RAM completely lost the packets for that one.
Yeah, the tape doesn't actually start rolling until they hit a high-friction convergence point in the 7th grade. And the setting here is so critical.
Oh, absolutely. The source calls it the untamed middle school corridor.
Untamed is the perfect word for a 90s middle school hallway. And the pilot is completely consumed by a massive out-of-band internal subroutine. He isn't thinking about normal 7th grade things at all.
No, he's trying to hack the free lunch pipeline.
I want to spend a minute on this because the mechanics are so revealing about how his brain works. He had just learned that his free lunch allocation actually included breakfast.
Right, which is a major resource discovery.
But to a kid who thinks in systems, discovering a new resource isn't enough. You have to understand the administrative execution logic to actually claim it. He couldn't just walk in and ask for food.
Right, because he's running a high-gain data conflict audit in his head. He is trying to decode the school's administrative grid without triggering any social alarms.
Because think about a 90s cafeteria. It's an intimidating maze. You've got physical paper tickets, specific lines, the terrifying authority of the lunch ladies.
And the intense social stigma of exposing poverty by holding that free lunch card.
Exactly. So he is treating the cafeteria like a locked software system. He's looking for the algorithmic exploit. And while his working memory is completely maxed out processing this massive load, he spots Kyle.
Sitting right outside a homeroom. And the contrast between these two nodes at this exact second sets up everything that follows.
How does the text describe Kyle there?
It says he looked like a soaked little puppy, completely anchored down by this massive denim jean backpack, deeply engrossed in books filled with intricate, non-linear illustrations.
And those books are the Dungeons & Dragons Rules Cyclopedia.
Yep. So you've got one kid trying to decode the external administrative rules of this hostile school grid, while the other is sitting on the floor using a massive denim shield to run an elaborate inward-facing system of imagination.
Kyle is entirely decoupled from the middle school operating system.
Exactly. To the pilot, the neurotypical 7th graders walking by are just ambient noise. They are background processes executing standard routines.
Just normal kids doing normal kid things.
Right. But Kyle is an anomaly. Kyle is running a high-density, complex simulation right there on the floor of the hallway. And that naturally demands attention from a brain that is natively wired to look for complex systems.
So this is where they solder the connection. They're both facing this immense transitional anxiety of middle school. But instead of crashing, they instantly execute a mutual peer-to-peer transaction.
The initialization of the binary braid?
The binary braid, I love that term. The source says this is an evolutionary survival strategy known as reciprocal altruism, but executed with absolute precision.
They essentially evaluate each other's deficits and assets and perform a perfectly balanced exchange.
Okay, let's break down the actual mechanics of this trade. The source says Kyle possessed absolute custody of the back-end rules of D&D, right? So he provided the pilot with an armor of the mind, like a cognitive sanctuary. It gave the pilot a place to build 3D CAD constructs, basically these highly complex mental models, without the institution pathologizing him for it. It was a safe mathematical sandbox.
And in exchange, the pilot became the front-end user interface.
Right.
He brought the emotional intensity and the forward momentum. But crucially, the pilot brought physical grounding. He traded his martial arts and self-defense training, the armor of the body, in exchange for the D&D rules.
Wait, how did that actually work in practice? Did the pilot just, like, start beating up bullies in the hallway?
No, it rarely requires actual violence once the system is established. It's more about projecting physical perimeter security.
Ah, okay. Projecting security.
Yeah, because in a 1991 middle school, the predators are looking for easy targets. Kids who flinch, kids who look down. The pilot, with his martial arts training, understood physical space, posture, eye contact.
So he became the physical firewall.
Exactly. If ambient predators approached, the pilot handled the front-end interface, the posturing, the verbal deflection, the physical blocking. He managed the real-world threat vectors, allowing Kyle to remain safely behind his denim shield, completely untargeted.
Wow. It's a pure hardware for software swap. I give you the physical firewall, you give me the back-end database.
It is brilliant in its simplicity.
It really reminds me of the symbiotic relationship between a clownfish and a sea anemone.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Like the anemone provides the structural sanctuary from predators. That's Kyle's mathematical world of D&D.
Yeah.
And the clownfish provides the active defense, chasing away polyp-eating fish. That's the pilot managing the hallway wilderness.
Yeah, nature runs the exact same algorithms.
But taking this from a biological metaphor to a literal data processing problem. Dungeons and Dragons, especially that 1991 rules cyclopedia, is notoriously dense.
Calling it dense is an understatement. I mean, it is essentially a textbook of probability, geometry, and resource management. It is an incredibly heavy computational load.
So how did two 7th graders actually process that math without just completely burning out? I mean, if I tried to read that manual at age 12, my brain would have just flatlined.
Most people's would. They survived it by engineering a strict division of computational labor. The sources call this absolute fractal parity.
Absolute fractal parity.
Yeah, they didn't both try to learn the whole game. They split the cognitive load right down the middle based on their inherent hardware strengths.
Okay, let's explore this division. So Kyle was the back end. The text states his cognitive firmware was optimized for strict data typing. He functioned natively as the clean, immutable database layer.
Exactly. Kyle was sitting there manually tracking the shifting grapple matrices, managing the encumbrance weights.
Meaning he was calculating exactly how many pounds of gear a character was carrying to determine their fractional movement speed penalty in a dungeon.
Exactly that. It's intense math.
And the audio file specifically mentions the TAC-0 combat engine. Quote, FAC-0 is pronounced Thero in H, end quote.
Right, which for anyone who didn't play early editions of D&D stands for to hit armor class 0.
Right, because combat wasn't just rolling a die and adding your strength back then. It was this descending matrix. You had to hold your base score, subtract the monster's descending armor class, factor in situational modifiers like, high ground or magical weapons, and consult probability tables on the fly.
And tracking FAC-0 manually requires holding multiple shifting integers in your working memory simultaneously, all while applying algebraic formulas. It is repetitive, strict data typing.
And Kyle handled all of it.
All of it. He kept absolute custody of the integers.
Which freed up the pilot to be the front-end user interface. The pilot deployed his asynchronous hyper-threading hardware as the active runtime execution layer.
Right. So while Kyle was doing the math in the background, the pilot was managing the localized lore, establishing the high-density emotional stakes, and rendering the highly volatile character models.
The prime example of this from the source material is the character Jangles the Clown.
Jangles. Yes, such a perfect example.
I just love this detail. So Jangles the Clown was a disgruntled postal worker who underwent a class shift into a sorcerer.
Which is just incredible.
The sheer chaotic creativity of a disgruntled postal worker suddenly gaining magical powers and dressing as a clown that is pure, volatile front-end rendering.
It is. Jangles the Clown is a narrative anomaly. It's pure chaos. But that chaos was only able to exist safely because Kyle was in the background.
Right, the pilot could fully inhabit the emotional volatility of Jangles without the system crashing, because he implicitly trusted that Kyle was accurately tracking Jangles' spell slots and ensuring his THC-0 was mathematically sound.
They naturally engineered an air-gapped, decoupled computing environment. Kyle is the server processing the data. The pilot is the ultra-high-definition monitor displaying the explosions.
But let me ask the what-if question here. What if the pilot hadn't met Kyle? What if the pilot tried to manage the volatile emotional stakes of Jangles the Clown and calculate the TAC-0 math and manage the grapple matrices all at the same exact time? What happens to that specific brain?
It results in a terminal system crash. I mean, this is a very common issue with hyper-threaded or ADHD profile brains.
A system crash.
Yeah, when you force a system that is built for high-speed associative lateral thinking to simultaneously manage strict, repetitive, linear data typing, the working memory buffer simply overflows. The brain runs out of RAM.
And what does that crash look like in the real world?
Extreme executive dysfunction, deep physical exhaustion, or just complete behavioral shutdown.
Wow.
The absolute genius of their 1991 sandbox is that they unconsciously recognized this exact hardware limitation and built an air-gap division of labor to prevent the crash entirely.
So they didn't just play a game, they built a fully functional operating system for their own survival.
Exactly.
And this wasn't just a phase. This division of labor became the literal initialization of the pilot's full-stack logic engine. And there's actually a physical artifact that proves this geometry.
Yes, the document highlights a very specific photograph. It describes it as looking like a wedding photo, marking a permanent structural marriage of the system's core components.
Let's look at the geometry of this photo. On one side, you have Kyle, representing the human back-end database, the custodian of logical truth and absolute math. But in the middle of the photo, you have a new node, Mother Helen.
Right.
And the text describes her as a feral WAC medical lab tech. WAC standing for Women's Army Corps.
Mother Helen's role is absolutely foundational here. The text refers to her as the epigenetic hardware calibration forge.
It's a dense phrase.
It is, but it means that where Kyle taught the pilot how to find truth in structured systems and back-end math, Helen taught him to find truth in the raw, unforgiving physical world.
She taught him to bypass human narrative and look for, quote, physical scorch marks on bare metal.
Exactly.
We need a concrete example of this, though. What does it actually mean to look for scorch marks on bare metal in a 1991 context? How does a feral WAC medical lab tech teach a kid to view the world?
Well, imagine a scenario where a piece of machinery breaks, say a lawnmower or a VCR. A neurotypical approach might involve reading the manual or asking someone what happened. But Helen's approach, the medical lab tech approach, is entirely forensic.
Right.
She wouldn't ask you how the VCR broke. She would open the casing and look for the literal scorch mark on the motherboard. The blackened circuitry is the absolute truth. Human narratives are subjective. The scorch mark is objective physical reality.
I see. And applied to human biology.
If a child falls, you don't ask them how much it hurts, you look at the scrape. The depth of the abrasion dictates the reality of the injury. She trained the pilot to anchor his reality to physical evidence.
The source conducts a narrative architecture audit here. It points out that the pilot's cognition is fundamentally geometric. For the pilot to understand a concept, the text must perfectly map onto physical reality.
So Helen and Kyle together form the dual co-architects of his logic engine.
It's a perfect triad. You have physical truth on one side with Helen, logical truth on the other side with Kyle, and the hyper-threaded execution engine, the pilot, in the middle, integrating them.
Right, because a system that only relies on abstract math without physical grounding is dangerous. But a system that only relies on raw physical instinct without logical structure is chaotic. Helen grounded the system, Kyle structured it.
It is literally the architecture of a computer motherboard. Helen is the power supply and the grounding wire. She grounds the system in brutal physical truth. Kyle is the CPU in the database managing the complex logical math, and the pilot is the display and the interface, rendering the output.
It's a really elegant way to visualize it.
But why was this specific, highly rigid architecture so necessary for the pilot to survive in the world? To answer that, the source takes us away from the software analogies and deep into actual biological hardware.
Yeah, this is where we cross from psychology into deep neurochemistry. The forensic registry confirms that the pilot operates with the RS-4680 GG genotype.
Also known as the warrior genotype.
Correct. So the RS-4680 gene provides instructions for making an enzyme called COMT, which is responsible for breaking down dopamine in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, breaking down dopamine.
And the GG variant of this gene means that the system produces an incredibly active version of this enzyme. The key defining feature of this genotype is that it clears dopamine from the prefrontal cortex at roughly 4 times the speed of the baseline neurotypical grid.
4 times the speed. Let's contextualize this for the listener. The brain is essentially vacuuming up dopamine almost as fast as it can be produced. What does this mean for someone's daily lived experience?
Well, if you ever felt completely drained, exhausted, and incapable of focusing during a highly structured, boring 2 p.m. budget meeting.
Oh, I think we all have.
Right, but suddenly a massive crisis breaks out at 4:55 p.m., and you instantly find yourself laser-focused, calm, and totally capable of handling it. You might be experiencing a milder version of this exact neurochemical reality.
The source refers to that boring 2 p.m. meeting as the beige grid.
Yes. And in that beige grid, the RS-468GG system drops into an exhausted, understimulated state because in a low-stakes, safe environment, there just isn't enough stress to trigger the production of dopamine to outpace that rapid clearance rate.
The brain is literally starved of the neurotransmitter it needs to maintain executive function. The engine is on, but there's no fuel in the line.
Exactly. But throw that exact same biological hardware into a high-friction terminal system crash with millions of dollars on the line. What happens?
Well, under immense stress, the human body naturally floods the system with stress hormones and massive amounts of dopamine.
Right. Now, for a standard baseline brain, that massive flood causes panic. It causes tunnel vision, shaking hands, and system failure. The baseline brain gets overwhelmed by the chemical surge.
But for the RS-468GG genotype, that massive flood of dopamine is exactly what this system has been waiting for. It finally matches the incredibly fast clearance rate.
The stress perfectly balances the hardware.
Wow.
The result isn't panic, it is absolute execution clarity. Time appears to slow down. The system finally achieves optimal performance.
I love the analogy of taking a deep-sea submarine, this incredible piece of engineering built to withstand crushing pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and dropping it into a suburban kiddie pool.
It's a great image.
And then everyone stands around complaining that the submarine looks clumsy, it's bumping into the walls, it doesn't float right, it's not broken. It was built for immense pressure.
That is the core tenet of what the source calls cognitive ecology. The text cites Dr. Ron Sterling's telemetry, which completely inverted the traditional medical motherboard on this issue. He stated that this is an evolutionary mismatch, not a component failure.
And pathologizing this, calling it a disease or a deficit or a disorder just because it doesn't function well in a kiddie pool, is what the source brutally refers to as an efficiency trap.
It forces us to ask a really profound question about modern institutional structures. How many people are sitting in beige corporate offices right now, being misdiagnosed as deficient, lazy, or erratic, when in reality they're simply high-performance submarines trapped in a kiddie pool?
It's staggering to think about.
The cognitive ecologist understands that you do not force a specialized node into behavioral conformity with the beige grid. You optimize the habitat so the node naturally chooses to stay and execute.
You drop the submarine into the trench where it belongs.
Exactly.
And this sets the stage for the massive payoff of this entire document. Because decades later, the pilot took this precise 1991 sandbox architecture, the Kyle backend, the Helling grounding, the RS-468GG neurochemistry, and he dragged it straight into the modern corporate world.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis, the Kyle invariant.
The 90s Crucible established a permanent law of physics for the pilot's brain. The Kyle invariant states that flawless back-end math with a boring, unintuitive user interface is completely unusable. Nobody wants to play D&D if it's just reading spreadsheets.
Right, but conversely, a beautiful, slick front-end UI that has zero underlying logic gates or data validation on the back end is just empty, unoptimized noise.
It is the absolute balance of their D&D days applied directly to enterprise software architecture. Kyle's 4C0 math means nothing if the pilot isn't rendering Jangles the Clown to make the game worth playing.
But Jangles the Clown is just annoying noise if Kyle isn't enforcing the physical rules of the game. They require each other to function.
And we see the pilot applying this invariant in massive, high-stakes environments. The source mentions him managing unpaid startup economies as a World of Warcraft guild leader. Let's dig into that. Running a WoW guild isn't just playing a video game, it's managing a volunteer corporation.
It is an incredibly complex sociological and mathematical undertaking. You are managing 40 individual human beings, all with different schedules, egos, and emotional needs.
That is the front-end UI.
Exactly. You have to keep morale high, manage disputes, and keep people motivated to log in and wipe on a digital dragon for 6 hours a night.
But you are also managing a highly complex back-end economy. You have loot councils, performance metrics, raid frames, and mathematical optimization of gear.
Because if you only have the back-end math, if you just scream at people about their DPS spreadsheets, the guild fractures because the UI is toxic.
Right, but if you only focus on the front-end morale, if you just want everyone to be happy and you hand out loot randomly, the guild fails because you lack the mathematical structure to actually defeat the encounters.
The pilot succeeded because he applied the Kyle invariant. Strict back-end math, paired with a highly managed front-end emotional interface.
And the logs show him taking this exact same framework into the traditional corporate sector, specifically during his time migrating thousands of web environments at Raymond James Financial.
This is where the stakes get astronomically high. Migrating financial web environments isn't a game. If data gets corrupted or a site goes down, millions of dollars are lost, and regulatory agencies get involved.
The pressure is immense. It is the deep-sea trench that his RS-4680GG genotype was built for.
And in that environment, the ultimate application of the Kyle invariant was the pilot's absolute refusal to let corporate networks deploy what he calls lying submit buttons.
Lying submit buttons. I am obsessed with this phrase because it perfectly captures the disease of modern corporate architecture. Walk us through a real-world example of a lying submit button so the listener can spot this in their own lives.
Let's look at a classic example, a modern corporate HR portal, like Workday or Taleo.
Oh, everybody knows those.
Right. You log in as an applicant. The front-end presentation is gorgeous. It has slick animations, rounded corners, beautiful typography. It has a bright blue button that says Upload Resume. But when you click that button, what actually happens on the back end?
It strips all your formatting and dumps your carefully crafted PDF into a chaotic, unreadable plain text file, and then forces you to manually retype everything into separate little boxes anyway.
Exactly. The front-end presentation, what you see and click on, does not match the back-end reality. There is no underlying logic gate validating the data transfer correctly. It is a facade.
It is all front-end UI, zero back-end math.
It is a lying submit button.
It's the beige world, preferring things to look functional rather than actually be mathematically true. It's the institutional equivalent of caring more about your outfit than your character stats.
Precisely. And the source argues that modern AI wrappers and institutional gatekeepers operate almost entirely on the logic of the lying submit button.
How so?
They demand what the text calls a visible file self. They want you to produce a sanitized, sterilized, easily digestible version of yourself, a slick front end, just so they can extract your data, your labor, your nectar. They do not care about the bare metal custody of the truth.
But because the pilot had Kyle hard-coded into his operating system since 1991, he had a permanent firewall against this systemic rot. He refused to deploy systems that lacked back-end integrity, even when management just wanted a pretty button to show the executives.
Kyle became the baseline template for what the document calls braided cognition.
Braided cognition. Tell us about that.
Braided cognition is the ultimate evolution of this entire operational log. It is the profound understanding that a hyper-threaded, neurodivergent brain achieves its absolute highest marginal returns when it pairs with nodes that possess sovereign tracking capacity.
Like Kyle.
Right. Institutional HR algorithms might demand a linear, perfectly formatted resume, but Kyle proved that the pilot's hyper-threaded processing worked flawlessly in complex, multi-tenant architectures decades before an enterprise paycheck ever verified it.
Kyle wasn't just a middle school friend. He was the original verification node. He was the proof of concept that allowed the pilot to trust his own operating system, even when the rest of the beige world told him he was broken.
And that is the philosophical core of the S.A.F.E.H.O.O.D recovery. The source insists that context transfer is a philosophy of selfhood pretending to be admin. You cannot let institutional gatekeepers subtitle your humanity. The reckoning is green, bare metal custody is absolute, and the human must remain at the lead.
What an incredible decompile. Let's synthesize exactly what we've mapped out today. We started with two neurodivergent kids in a 1991 hallway. One is running a massive data audit to hack the administrative breakfast pipeline. The other is hiding behind a denim backpack running Hassie's zero probability matrices.
They execute a literal trade,
Yeah.
physical self-defense in the hallway wilderness for the complex back-end math of a cognitive sanctuary.
They built a decoupled computing environment using absolute fractal parity to manage their cognitive load without overflowing their working memory.
And through the addition of physical grounding learning from Mother Helen to find scorch marks on bare metal, and the realization that a rapidly clearing dopamine genotype is an evolutionary advantage in a crisis, they engineered an open-source air-gapped sandbox.
And that sandbox became an unbreakable operational strategy for managing world-class enterprise software migrations. They built a sovereign protocol for surviving the corporate world. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, as you go back out into the beige grid of your daily life.
Think deeply about the systems you interact with daily. Where are you encountering lying submit buttons in your own life? Where are you seeing situations, corporate portals, or even people that look incredibly slick and functional on the surface but have absolutely zero logic, validation, or truth backing them up in the back end? And perhaps more importantly, who is the Kyle in your life? Who is the node holding your back end math accountable, ensuring that your front end rendering is grounded in reality?
Next time, Section 4 the calendar hung itself, said Bright Eyes.